Today we're talking about housing in the Philippines, and more importantly, why this topic creates so much confusion, frustration, and anger online. You may have seen claims like, over half of Filipinos can't afford decent housing. And then someone responds, that's impossible. The Philippines has more than 7,000 islands. At first glance, that argument might sound reasonable. If there is so much land, why would people have difficulty finding a place to live? But somewhere between those two statements, the real issue gets lost. Because housing affordability is not simply a question of how much land exists. It is a question of where people can afford to live, where they can find work, how much transportation costs, where their children go to school, where hospitals are located, and whether the household can still afford food and other necessities after paying for housing. That distinction is extremely important. This episode is not about attacking anyone's intelligence, education, or background. It is not about saying that one group of Filipinos is smarter or more hardworking than another, and it is certainly not about insulting people who disagree. Instead, we are going to slow down and ask a much more important question. What does housing affordability actually mean? And why does having thousands of islands not automatically mean that every Filipino family has access to an affordable home? When researchers talk about housing affordability, they are not simply asking, does a house physically exist somewhere? That is a completely different question. The real question is, can a household reasonably pay for housing without sacrificing other basic necessities? Can the family pay rent or a mortgage? Can they pay electricity and water? Can they afford transportation to work? Can their children remain in school? Can they afford health care? Can they still buy enough food? Can they deal with an unexpected emergency? These questions matter because a house can technically be affordable on paper, while the overall cost of living around that house makes it impossible for a family to sustain. For example, imagine a family receives a house at a very low cost. That sounds like excellent news. But what if the father now has to spend several hundred pesos every day commuting to work? What if the mother loses access to nearby employment? What if their children need to travel much farther to attend school? What if the nearest hospital is hours away? What if grandparents who used to help with childcare are now on the other side of the city? Suddenly, the cheap house is no longer the complete story. This is why housing affordability is often measured in relation to household income and overall living expenses. Institutions such as the Philippine Statistics Authority and international development organizations use different indicators to examine housing conditions, affordability, financial pressure, and access to basic services. So when surveys report that around half of households experience difficulty related to housing affordability or housing costs, that does not automatically mean people are homeless, people are unemployed, people are uneducated, people are refusing to work, or people are simply being irresponsible. It means that housing and related living costs can consume a significant portion of household resources, and that distinction is essential. Now let's address the famous argument, but the Philippines has more than 7,000 islands. Yes, it does. But the number of islands does not tell us where people can realistically live and work. People don't choose their homes based only on available land. They choose locations based on opportunity. Where are the jobs? Where are the schools? Where are the hospitals? Where are the universities? Where are the transportation systems? Where are government offices? Where are the markets? Where are the businesses? Where are the factories? Where are the ports? Where are the customers? Where are the family networks? These questions determine where people actually want and need to live. A piece of land on a remote island may technically be available, but if there is no stable employment, no reliable transportation, limited healthcare, limited education, and limited access to markets, that land does not automatically become affordable housing. It may simply become land, and land is not the same thing as a home. More importantly, a home is not the same thing as a sustainable livelihood. This is one of the biggest misunderstandings in online conversations about Philippine housing. People see a map. They see thousands of islands. They imagine enormous amounts of unused space. But economic geography doesn't work that way. People move toward places where economic activity is concentrated. And when millions of people are competing for housing in the same areas, the result is pressure on land prices, rent, transportation, and living costs. So the real question isn't, does the Philippines have enough land? The better question is, does the Philippines have enough affordable housing in places where people can realistically work and live? That is a very different question. Now we need to talk about another important part of this discussion. The Philippine government does provide housing assistance. There are government housing programs, socialized housing initiatives, financing mechanisms, and relocation programs intended to help families living in informal settlements. Programs involving agencies such as the National Housing Authority, along with housing finance mechanisms such as Pag-ibig Fund, are part of the broader effort to make housing more accessible. And yes, house and lot packages and relocation housing do exist. These programs are real. They have helped many families. So it would be unfair to say that the government simply does nothing. But there is another side to the story. Some families decline, abandon, or eventually leave relocation housing. And this is where online discussions often become extremely judgmental. Someone might say, why would anyone reject a free house? It sounds like an obvious question, but the answer becomes much clearer once we look beyond the walls of the house. Imagine a family living in an informal settlement close to a major employment area. The house may be small. The neighborhood may be crowded. There may be serious safety and sanitation problems. But the family has one major advantage: location. The father may work nearby. The mother may clean houses nearby. A family member may sell food nearby. A child may attend a school nearby. A grandmother may live a few streets away. A neighbor may help watch the children. Public transportation may be cheap and frequent. The family may be able to walk to work. Now imagine that family is relocated several hours away. They receive a better house. The structure may be safer. The neighborhood may be more organized. The environment may be cleaner. But suddenly, the father needs 2 hours to reach work. The mother loses her nearby customers. The children need more expensive transportation. Childcare becomes more difficult. The family spends more money every day simply getting to places they previously reached on foot. The house itself may be cheaper, but the cost of living may become higher. That is the fundamental problem. Housing cannot be separated from employment. This brings us to one of the most important ideas in this entire episode. Housing without access to livelihood is not a complete housing solution. A house is a physical structure. A livelihood is what allows a family to continue paying for food, transportation, education, healthcare, electricity, water, and everything else. You need both. If you give someone a house but move them so far away from their source of income that they can no longer work effectively, you have solved one problem while potentially creating another. This doesn't mean relocation programs are useless. They can be extremely valuable. It means that relocation works best when housing is connected to employment, transportation, schools, healthcare, markets, public services, and community support. Without those connections, relocation can become difficult to sustain. And that is why some families return to informal settlements. Not necessarily because they don't appreciate the house. Not necessarily because they are lazy. Not necessarily because they are uneducated. Sometimes they are simply making a survival calculation. Now let's talk about income, because ultimately, housing affordability always comes back to one fundamental question. How much does a household earn, and how much does housing cost? In many households, income is not high enough to create significant financial security. People may work full-time. They may work multiple jobs. Both adults may be employed. And yet, after rent, utilities, food, transportation, school expenses, and healthcare, there may be very little left. This is where housing affordability becomes complicated. Economists often use a benchmark of around 30% of household income for housing costs when discussing affordability. Once housing costs become significantly higher than that, households may begin making difficult choices. Maybe they postpone medical treatment. Maybe they reduce food spending. Maybe they borrow money. Maybe they stop saving. Maybe they delay sending money to relatives. Maybe they cannot afford school-related expenses. Maybe they use credit to pay for everyday necessities. The family may still have a roof over its head, but financially, they are under enormous pressure. That is why saying, "They have a house, so what's the problem?" misses the point. The question isn't simply whether the family has 4 walls. The question is whether they can maintain those 4 walls without sacrificing everything else. Urban centers create another problem. Cities attract people because cities contain opportunity. People move toward cities because they want better jobs. They want access to universities. They want better health care. They want transportation. They want business opportunities. They want access to markets. And they want a chance to improve their children's future. But when millions of people want to live near the same economic centers, housing demand increases. And when demand increases faster than affordable housing supply, prices rise. Developers respond to the market. They build condominiums, high-density developments, rental units, commercial residential projects, gated communities, developments targeted at middle and upper income buyers. These developments may be perfectly legitimate businesses, but the problem is that the market does not automatically guarantee enough housing at prices that match the income of lower wage workers, and this creates a mismatch. You can have cranes everywhere. You can have new towers rising every year. You can have modern condominiums appearing across the skyline. And yet, ordinary workers can still struggle to find housing they can afford. Because building more housing is not automatically the same as building enough affordable housing. Now, let's address one of the most sensitive terms in this discussion: squatter areas. The more formal term is often informal settlements. These communities are frequently misunderstood. When outsiders look at an informal settlement, they may see crowded houses, poor infrastructure, narrow streets, and insecure land tenure. And those problems are real. But the reasons people live there are more complicated. People generally don't wake up one morning and say, "I want to live somewhere without legal security, sanitation, or reliable infrastructure." For many families, informal settlements develop because they provide one thing that formal housing cannot: access to opportunity. They may be close to construction jobs, domestic work, cleaning jobs, vending, transportation, ports, markets, restaurants, factories, offices, and other informal employment. A person may be able to walk from home to work. That can make an enormous difference to a low-income household. If the same worker is relocated several kilometers away, transportation costs can consume a significant part of their income. So what looks like an irrational housing decision from the outside may actually be an economic decision. There is another factor that outsiders often overlook: family networks. In many Filipino communities, extended family plays a major role in everyday survival. Grandparents may help take care of children. Siblings may share expenses. Aunts and uncles may provide emergency assistance. Neighbors may exchange childcare. Relatives may recommend job opportunities. Someone may watch a child while the mother works. Someone else may prepare food. Someone else may lend money during an emergency. These relationships have economic value even though they don't appear on the payslip. Now, imagine moving the entire household somewhere far away. Suddenly, the family may have to pay for services that relatives previously provided for free. Childcare becomes expensive. Transportation becomes expensive. Emergency support becomes more difficult. Employment information becomes harder to access. So, relocation doesn't just move a house. It can move an entire social and economic support system. Online, people sometimes say, why don't they just move? But move where? To another island? To another province? To the countryside? To a relocation site? To another city? And then what? Where will they work? How will they get there? Where will their children go to school? Who will look after the children? What happens if someone gets sick? How much will transportation cost? How long will the commute take? These are not theoretical questions. For low-income households, small changes in daily expenses can have enormous consequences. A middle-class household might spend more on transportation and simply adjust its budget. For a family living close to the financial edge, that same transportation increase may mean less food. That's why people sometimes prioritize proximity to employment over the physical quality of the house. They are not necessarily choosing poverty. They may be choosing the option that allows them to continue earning money. This is probably one of the most mocked parts of the housing debate. Someone says, why would anyone refuse a free house and lot? But again, we have to look at the entire calculation. Suppose a family receives a house. The monthly housing cost is low. Sounds great. But now, the father spends 4 hours every day commuting. The mother loses her customers. The children spend more money traveling to school. The family needs additional childcare. Transportation costs increase, and the father eventually realizes that his job is no longer sustainable. The family now has a house but no reliable income. So what happens? They may leave, they may rent somewhere closer to work, or they may return to the informal settlement. From the outside, this can look irrational. From inside the household's budget, it can make perfect sense. Refusing relocation is not necessarily ignorance. Sometimes it is a survival calculation. Now let's look at relocation from a long-term perspective. Many governments try to address informal settlements by moving families into planned communities. On paper, the solution appears straightforward. Provide a house. Provide safer surroundings. Improve sanitation. Reduce exposure to floods, fires, landslides, or other hazards. Provide legal or more secure housing arrangements. These are all positive goals, but the success of relocation depends on what happens after the family moves. A housing project is not successful simply because houses were constructed. The real question is, can people build sustainable lives there? One of the biggest challenges is location. Land close to major economic centers is expensive. Land farther away is usually cheaper. So, from a government planning perspective, it can be financially easier to build large housing developments farther from the city. But cheaper land can create expensive transportation problems. A relocation site may be far from employment hubs, far from schools, far from hospitals, far from markets, far from public transportation, and far from family networks. This creates a difficult trade-off. The family gains a house, but may lose access to employment. They gain physical housing security, but may lose economic security. They gain a better structure, but may face higher daily transportation costs. And this is why housing policy is much more complicated than simply constructing houses. To understand why people sometimes return to informal settlements, we also need to understand how low-income communities survive. Families often depend on networks that have developed over many years. A neighbor may watch the children. A cousin may provide temporary work. A grandmother may prepare meals. A brother may lend money. An aunt may help someone find employment. A friend may know about a construction job. These relationships form an informal safety net. They may not be visible in official statistics, but they are extremely important. When a family is relocated far away, those networks can disappear, and suddenly the family becomes more financially vulnerable. This is why the success of relocation cannot be measured only by how many houses were constructed. We also need to ask, how many families remained there? Did they keep their jobs? Can their children attend school? Can they afford transportation? Do they have access to health care? Can they maintain their household expenses? Those questions tell us much more about whether a housing program actually works. This is where housing discussions often become emotional. People start making statements such as, "They're lazy, they're uneducated, they should just move, they don't know how to manage money, why don't they buy land? Why don't they build a house somewhere else?" But these statements simplify a complex economic problem into a judgment about individual character. And sometimes individual decisions do contribute to financial problems. Of course they can. But housing affordability is also influenced by larger structural factors, such as wages, land prices, rent, transportation, infrastructure, employment concentration, population growth, interest rates, access to financing, public services. You cannot understand the housing problem by looking at only one household. You have to look at the entire system around that household. It is also important to recognize that the Philippine government does not simply ignore housing. There are agencies and programs designed to address housing needs. The National Housing Authority has been involved in socialized and relocation housing. The Pag-ibig Fund provides housing financing mechanisms. There are also programs involving local governments and other government institutions. These efforts have helped many families. But government programs also face real constraints. For example, government budgets are limited. Urban land is expensive. Infrastructure is expensive. Transportation systems need investment. Utilities need to be installed. Schools and hospitals must serve growing communities. Employment must exist nearby. You cannot simply build thousands of houses and assume the problem is finished. A functioning community requires much more than houses. It requires roads, water, electricity, schools, healthcare, transportation, employment, markets, security, and social connections. At this point, let's step back from individual arguments and look at the bigger picture. When we talk about housing affordability in the Philippines or anywhere else, we are not simply asking whether houses exist. We are asking whether households can realistically maintain a home while meeting their other obligations. Can they pay rent? Can they pay a mortgage? Can they afford electricity? Can they afford water? Can they pay transportation? Can they feed their children? Can they afford healthcare? Can they keep their children in school? Can they save anything for emergencies? Can they survive an unexpected expense? That is what financial affordability is about. So when a survey says that a large proportion of households experience housing-related financial pressure, it doesn't automatically mean that half the population is homeless. It means that housing costs and related expenses can place serious pressure on household finances, and that is an entirely different statement. Let's return one more time to the 7,000 island argument. It sounds convincing because it focuses on physical space. But economic problems are not solved simply by counting square kilometers. Imagine someone tells you, there are millions of hectares of land in the country, so nobody should be poor. That doesn't follow logically. Why? Because land is not automatically productive, and land is not automatically accessible, and land is not automatically connected to employment. The same principle applies to housing. A piece of land becomes much more valuable when it is close to jobs, roads, ports, schools, hospitals, markets, public transportation, electricity, water, communications. That is why urban land can be extraordinarily expensive while remote land remains relatively cheap. The problem is not simply scarcity of land. It is scarcity of accessible, serviced, affordable land in economically useful locations. That is the distinction. Like many developing economies, the Philippines has significant economic concentration in particular urban regions. Metro Manila is one of the most important examples. People move toward economic centers because economic opportunity is concentrated there. Businesses locate there. Universities are there. Hospitals are there. Government offices are there. Transportation networks connect there. Major employers are there. This creates a powerful cycle. People move toward jobs. Businesses attract workers. Workers create demand for housing. Demand pushes housing prices upward. Higher prices push lower-income families farther away. But moving farther away increases transportation costs. And eventually, the family may find itself trapped between two expensive choices. Pay more for housing near work, or pay more for transportation from cheaper housing farther away. That is the housing affordability problem in a nutshell. And there is another cost we sometimes forget: time. Imagine two families. Family A lives close to work. They spend 20 minutes commuting. Family B lives in a cheaper relocation area. They spend 2 hours traveling each way. Family B may technically have cheaper housing, but they are paying with time. 4 hours of commuting every day means less time with children, less time resting, less time working a second job, less time caring for elderly relatives, less time participating in community life, less time sleeping. Time is an economic resource too, and when transportation is unreliable, the consequences can become even worse. A late bus can mean arriving late to work. Arriving late repeatedly can threaten employment. Losing employment can threaten the family's ability to keep the house. So transportation and housing are deeply connected. This is perhaps the most important lesson from the entire discussion. When people say, just give them houses, they are thinking about the physical structure. But a functioning home exists within a larger system. A person needs somewhere to sleep, but they also need somewhere to work. Children need somewhere to live, but they also need schools. Families need houses, but they also need hospitals. Workers need employment, but they also need transportation. Communities need housing, but they also need markets, infrastructure, utilities, and public services. So housing policy cannot operate in isolation. Housing policy is also employment policy. It is transportation policy. It is education policy. It is infrastructure policy. It is social policy. And ultimately, it is economic policy. Behind every statistic is a household, a mother trying to stretch a weekly budget, a father commuting for hours to reach work, a grandmother helping raise grandchildren, a young couple trying to save for their first home, a family deciding whether to pay rent or a medical bill, a worker choosing to live in a crowded neighborhood because it is close enough to walk to work. These are not abstract economic models. These are people making decisions under constraints. And sometimes, the decision that looks strange from the outside makes perfect sense once you understand the circumstances. That's why we should be careful when discussing poverty and housing. It is easy to judge. It is harder to understand. Now, to be clear, none of this means that every government housing program is perfect. It doesn't mean every relocation project fails. It doesn't mean every informal settlement is safe or desirable. And it doesn't mean that government should simply allow informal settlements to continue indefinitely. There are legitimate reasons for relocation. Some communities are located in areas vulnerable to flooding, fires, landslides, pollution, unsafe infrastructure, or other hazards. Moving families to safer environments can save lives. The issue is how relocation is designed and implemented. A successful relocation program should ideally consider not only where can we build houses, but also where can people build sustainable lives. That is a much higher standard. Ultimately, The housing problem raises a much bigger question. What happens when wages grow more slowly than the cost of living? If housing prices rise faster than salaries, affordability deteriorates. If transportation becomes more expensive, households have less disposable income. If schools and hospitals remain concentrated in urban areas, families continue to move toward those areas. If affordable housing is built far from employment, people may not remain there. These problems are interconnected, and that's why there is no single magic solution. You cannot solve everything by building houses. You cannot solve everything by telling people to move. You cannot solve everything by increasing wages. You cannot solve everything by building roads. All of these things have to work together. If there is one thing I want you to remember from this entire episode, it is this. Housing affordability is not about whether land exists. It is about whether people can realistically live there. It is about whether they can work there. It is about whether their children can go to school. It is about whether they can reach a hospital. It is about whether transportation is affordable. It is about whether the family can still buy food after paying housing costs. It is about whether people can maintain relationships with the family members and communities they depend on. And most importantly, it is about whether a household can build a stable life. The Philippines, having thousands of islands, is a geographic fact. But geography alone does not create economic opportunity. Land alone does not create jobs. A house alone does not create income. And the relocation site alone does not create a functioning community. So the next time you see someone online say, "The Philippines has more than 7,000 islands. How can anyone complain about housing?" Remember that the real issue isn't simply how much land exists. The real issue is where people can afford to live while still having access to work, education, healthcare, transportation, family support, and basic necessities. And when someone says, "Why don't they just accept the free house?" the better question is, can that family actually survive there? That is the question that matters, because housing is not just about walls and a roof. It is about access. It is about opportunity. It is about security. It is about dignity. And it is about whether people can build stable lives without living under constant financial pressure. The challenge for the Philippines and for many countries around the world is not simply to build more houses. It is to build livable communities connected to opportunity. Communities where people can work, where children can study, where families can access healthcare, where transportation doesn't consume their income, where people don't have to choose between an affordable home and a livelihood. Because at the end of the day, a house is only truly affordable if the life around that house is affordable too. And that is the part of the housing debate that is often missing. Housing is not just about property. It is about people. It is about economics. It is about geography. It is about family. And ultimately, It is about the ability to build a stable and dignified life. That is the real housing question.